Hi guys! Today we're talking about self-identification words. I use such a long word to describe that because when some people hear the word labels, they think of negative things. So I'm not going to call it a label, I'm going to call it a self-identification word. Okay, so what is a self-identification word? It's a word that somebody uses to describe themselves. For instance, autistic individual. Words that I use to describe myself are artistic individual or individual with autism, or I say that I have different planet syndrome or that I have autism. Words that I don't use are autistic as a noun. I'll use it as an adjective, but some people describe themselves as an autistic. I don't like using this, so I don't. There's nothing wrong with using it. It's just I don't personally like using it. I feel like calling myself an autistic is too much just describing myself based on autism. Now, I'm going to tell you the 3 steps to finding out somebody's identification words and respecting them. First off, is if you find out that somebody has something where they have identification words, whether it be a gender or a disability or anything really that requires identification words. Now, this person will tell you that they have this. You do not seek this information out. This isn't something that you seek out, it's something that is told to you when the person feels like it's appropriate. Do not go seeking out this kind of information, it will get you in hot water. Now, the second step, now that you know this person has something where they need identification words, is to respectfully ask them what words they use to identify this trait or this attribute about themselves. Like, for instance, so you said you have autism. What are words that I can use to describe the fact that you have autism that you would find respectful? That's one way to go about it. Or another way to go about it is, so I heard there are a lot of ways to describe people with autism. What are your preferred ways of describing it based around yourself? That's another way to do it. And I'm going to give you one more option. So you have this attribute about yourself. Like, for instance, you could say, so you are someone with autism, or you are a person with ADHD. How would I describe you to my friends with this attribute that you would find respectful? That's the first step. The second step, oh wait, that was the second step. The third step is to memorize these words. Basically, you want to just practice using these words when you're describing them. Take a second before you say it to remember what their preferred words for describing this attribute about themselves. Like, for instance, this is Gabrielle. She is part of the neurodiverse community, or is or is also known as an autistic individual. Or this is Gabrielle. She has bipolar disorder and autism. Or this is Gabrielle. she is an autistic individual and has no problem telling other people about this. Now I'm going to give you one more step, which is step number 4, but this is kind of something that goes along with it, but isn't really related to identification words. Okay, this is where you have to realize that not everyone wants you to tell people their identification words. Like, for instance, someone might not be comfortable with telling a coworker or fellow student or their teachers or just someone in general their their condition or identification words or whatever. This is kind of a step that you should consider before telling people other people's identification words. Like, I'm going to give you a scenario. This isn't really related to autism, but it goes along with the same idea. Say, uh, say I was a lesbian and I didn't have a girlfriend and I told you I was one. And I told you how I relate and what I think about girls. Now imagine going off to someone who I am not comfortable with telling, and because you didn't check whether I'm comfortable telling them or not, you end up telling them. And that causes me to have to deal with this person that I didn't want knowing because they might have biases or something, dealing with the fact that I am part of the LGBT community and them knowing. It's kind of similar with the neurodiverse community. Some people aren't comfortable sharing it. Other people are. So you can't so with a similar idea, you don't want to out people in a way from the neurodiverse community. It's not that people have anything against people in that community. It's just people within that community tend to be looked at differently than people who aren't in that community. And it causes some problems for people within that community when someone they don't want to know about the fact that they have autism or ADHD or bipolar, if they find out about it. In a similar sense as LGBT, because there are cultural biases against people with a neurodiversity. If you look at Seeing Media clearly, some of his comments, you will see that he calls autism a disease. I have a pretty decent amount of respect for this person. I'm not sure whether they are a guy or girl, so I'm just going to call them a they. But they have some views which I consider toxic. And he considers my views toxic. Well, they consider my views toxic. They see autism as a disease when it's not. It's a different way of thinking, and it's the way your brain is wired. Well, people who see autism as a disease, and there are people like that out there who a lot of people will run into, and a lot of people will be viewed differently once they get found out as having autism by these people. And you could accidentally out someone if you don't know whether or not that person is aware of it, and whether or not that person is okay with them being aware of it. So that's something you need to keep in mind. Now I wanted to go over one other thing. Yes. There are some, when it comes to self-identification words, there are, if you are for say, writing an autistic character, instead of, you could either ask someone with autism what their identification words are and use that, or you could do some research where you look up um, other people's identification words. Like, for instance, you might use the word Aspie, which is a word that a lot of people with Asperger's use, and therefore would not be offensive. And something you should be aware of with self-identification words is that typically the words that are considered okay are the words that are made by either individuals with the condition or whatever, people who identify with those words, or doctors. People who, those are the people who typically make words that are considered acceptable. Or in some rare cases, perhaps people who work with people like that or family members. But typically, the words that most people are considered okay are made by individuals who identify with them or doctors. Other people can make words to identify with them, but unless people with actually use the identification words for themselves, it's typically not really deemed acceptable to use those words for other people. Because you want to use respectful words. It's like how somebody decided to say that somebody is bound to a wheelchair when people who are actually wheelchair users find it extremely unacceptable. Basically, you want to use words that people with the condition use, not people who don't have the condition have made up. Well, that's all I got to say. Autistic Nation signing off.